Hello there, everyone. So today we are going to continue our looking at the nations of the late 18th or late 19th century and get into late 19th century Russia. So when last I talked about Russia, we were in the Crimean War and they are reeling. They just got hammered and Nicholas I died and his son Tsar Alexander II, who you see pictured there, will take over. And he is going to look at some issues that Russia is dealing with, because really what he wants to do is reform Russia so it can compete with the West. That is the whole idea. Okay, so number one, he's got issues agriculturally. Serfdom and other practices were antiquated and crop yields were weak. Russian landowners couldn't produce enough to compete with anybody. So, they're basically looking at sustenance farming, not, being able to, trade stuff. And military, their military just wasn't good because serfs formed the bulk because they were uneducated. They formed the bulk, and because they were uneducated and really didn't get lots of opportunities to learn stuff, they couldn't deal with changing technologies and tactics, and we have to fix this, okay? Now, he's going to do some things that will actually improve Russia's reach internationally. They will be involved with both Finland and Bulgaria in gaining their independence. The Finns will get independence actually partially out of Russia, but mostly from Sweden, and Bulgaria will gain their independence from the Ottoman Empire. And so these two things has these two nations that both border Russia. You can set them up as potential allies in the future, and overall it just makes your country look good. But then on March 3rd, 1861, he will emancipate the serfs. And as you can see there, a serf being attacked, if you will, by an overseer. So March 3rd, 1861, these serfs are emancipated, okay? And they are given some key new rights. They can now own property, they can marry as they choose, and they can actually bring suits in law courts. So that is a big deal. But there are some catches. The government bought land from landowners to sell at a reduced rate to the serfs, right? And of course, shockingly enough, the landowners will sell them subpar land. And as a result, it would lead to food shortages in the future for peasants whose population was growing, and it will actually kind of keep them in debt. And so none of that's really going to work. So it was like, okay, good idea to emancipate the serfs, good idea to get them land, but you didn't quite do it the way that you needed to. Now, there were some major issues with the serfs. One, they were expected to pay the government for the land that they were given. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with that if you give them a good opportunity to earning income, which they're not going to do. And so in order to govern this, you're going to have the creation of the mir, which you see on the right side there. So the basic idea of the mir is that this is a village commune that was responsible for collecting payments and submitting them to the government. So in a sense, it was a commune that actually owned the land. It was the commune that owned the land and not the individual peasants, which was kind of against the point. And in many cases, the communes also had the power to prevent these peasants from leaving the land until their debt was paid in full. So once again, the serfs kind of become tied to the land through debt. So yes, they're no longer serfs and ruled by the nobles in the way they used to be, but in the same sense, they don't have the individual rights they were hoping. So true reform really doesn't happen. This is going to lead to long-term issues in the future, which we will get to later on, and especially when Marxism starts to, and Leninism will run through this area. However, he does do some other reforms. He is going to create a local form of rule known as zemstvos. I think zemstvos. I don't know. I looked it up and now I'm confused. Okay, so what these were is they were local assemblies elected by local landowners, townspeople, and peasants. you had to own some type of property to be involved, so it still kind of kept it relatively less. But you, at the same time, um, it was still open. Like there was no, you didn't have to be like noble or anything like that. They also could use local taxes to run like things like local education, food relief, and road and bridge maintenance. So, just like kind of local town governments are set up for the first time. Okay. The catch is that there's no real representation in the federal government, but you're starting somewhere. You did have local, also in provincial courts. That was good, and you have some things like equality before the law, innocent until proven guilty, as well as legal representation. So like, it's pretty good. Although there would be some backlash and explosive backlashes to what Alexander was starting, and he was not really ready for it. Many social reformers begin speaking out en masse because they need to gain more rights, especially the rights of a lot of people of Western Europe. But then there'll be like the old nobility and bureaucrats trying to prevent these new rights, and you really have a chaotic system. And the thing is, Alexander's trying to do it in an efficient way, but people just aren't responding basically how he thought they were. And you're also going to get some like individual reformers that are going to be like really, really big. One is a guy by the name of Alexander Herzen. He was a Russian exile who was living in London, and basically he was really trying to advocate for more power and independence for Russian peasants. Like he proposes ideas like that a peasant village commune should be given power for like independent self-rule, and he starts kind of flirting with the ideas of socialism, like communal governments, communal living, and the ideas of socialism that are kind of floating around Europe at this time, he's a big advocate for. And it becomes known as populism. And the whole idea is to create a new society through revolution from the peasants. Although he's not a big, like, violent revolution guy per se, but he's looking to kind of completely change the system. That's the whole idea. But you also have some radical reformers. And the key idea here was that people felt that more extreme steps needed to be taken to get real reform. These people advocate like violence and just complete upheaval. One of the big ones was a woman. You see there on the top left. Her name was Vila Sazulich, and she was a big member of a group known as the Land and Freedom Organization. That was a populist group that advocated violent reform. She actually shot and wounded the Governor General of St. Petersburg in 1878. She actually got off on the charge, but her success there really would inspire others. And so it depends on where you're at. Some people, some peasants and commoners would be really digging these people, where others would look at them as domestic terrorists. There's always a perspective. But then you have a group which, today would be absolutely characterized as a terrorist group known as the People's Will. They are a big populist group who they want to target members of the Tsar's regime. And the idea is to kill them. And the whole idea is that they would sow chaos and upend the regime so much through violence that the peasants would rise up and overthrow it, or that it would just completely collapse. And those are some of their key ideas. Now, they were similar to certain terror groups today. They worked in like cells in different part of the countries, and they acted under like an executive council. That's actually a picture of the council there on the left. They'll carry out a couple different plots. Some bombings, some gun attacks. They actually try to kill Alexander one time, but others are killed instead of him. They actually kill 11 in one of the attacks, and they're pretty intense. Now, Alexander isn't just going to stand by, and these attacks by the People's Will are increasing, and so then he moves to suppress them. He outlaws the People's Will. They're going to try to start throwing people in jail. And then the key thing, the People's Will, is it's time to try to kill Alexander himself. And they feel that is going to be the moment. And they find out that he is going to do a military review, and they send a series of bombers along the route to kill him. The first bombs that they detonate actually fail because the carriage he was in was a bulletproof and an armored car, which was a gift from Napoleon III. But for whatever reason, it was partially damaged, and instead of making sure that he was completely protected, he was able to get out, and then another bomber ran up, basically a suicide bomber, and was able to detonate a bomb near him and actually killed him. And so this big-time reformer wasn't reforming enough, and thus he is executed. Unfortunately, for people who wanted reform, his son, Alexander II, was so angered by this because he's like, so wait a minute, my dad does all these different things, he tries to improve your lives, and you're going to kill him? Well, forget that. And you're going to see a massive crackdown, and Alexander III is going to go the complete different direction from his father, and as a result, it's just going to be, kind of chaos and unstable. Okay, so that's going to be an idea of what we see with Russia. We will talk later about Alexander II and then eventually Nicholas II, and kind of the time is ticking. We're getting about 40 years out from the fall of the actual Russian Empire. But as you can see, late 1800s, so many different things going on within Europe. Plus, we're going to have imperialism and all sorts of other stuff to talk about. So, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys soon.